Hello everyone, I'm Sarah and welcome to Portal to the Paranormal, the Witch Edition. Thriller Thursday. Oh, so we've got a very special guest for you this evening. Okay, some of you might ask, what have witches got to do with the paranormal? Well, in all honesty, they pop up everywhere, especially when you're an investigator. You could be like in an old building, there's the woodlands, there's villages and towns. There's always some kind of witch story about it, and they've been around for centuries. A few examples would be Pendle Hill witches, from Lancaster, the Cage in Kent, that was a jail for witches back in the 1600s. Boscastle, that's the equivalent of Salem, should I say, in Massachusetts, and also Voodoo in New Orleans. We have a really exciting guest, our very own witch, should I say. I'm going to bring him on, and he can tell you all about himself. So here we go, and his name is Mannun. He has his own YouTube channel, Witch in the Workings. Here we go. Hello, Mannun.
Hi, how's it going?
Oh, good, thanks. Oh, I'm super excited to have you.
Yes, I'm excited to be here. It's awesome.
Oh, so we've got a few. Anybody watching, if you have any questions to read, I'll read them out and he will answer them for you, won't you, Mannun?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Anything you're not comfortable, just say pass. All right.
Okay.
I'll try and keep it.
Yeah, it shouldn't be an issue. I should be able to answer everything.
All righty. So the question that is on everybody's lips is, how did you get into witchcraft? How did you get into witch? And there are all sorts of different kinds of witches as well. It's all very confusing for me because I'm not, the only thing I have to relate to is watching all the Harry Potter movies.
Okay. Well, no, that's a great question, actually. So I personally grew up always into sort of like the occult. So I had my cousins and stuff that would come over. We would always bust out the Ouija board. We would always play stuff like light as a feather. We'd always do these little things. You know, I remember way back in the day, like when I was a kid, 10 years old, dabbling with ghosts and stuff, around, and I actually had a ghost experience from the time I was a baby. Because to make a long story short, my parents literally we had a house fire and they had to live at my grandma's house, and my grandma had a ghost that always kept the door open in the room. If you shut it, it would open up. She would put a 10-pound weight behind it. It would just push the weight and open up. I was just learning how to walk, and my mom and they were, and my parents, my mom and dad were in this. Unfortunately, they were in that room. So my brothers and sisters were in the family room, and my grandma had no AC. So this is back in the 70s. So she would put a big fan in the family room for my brothers and sisters to help keep them cool, And it was where, it had the slits, it's his old fans, and of course, those older fans were extra powerful and extra dangerous. They had no, the blades were steel and everything else, the stuff was just built better back in the day. And, the door kept opening, and I was just learning how to walk, and I was doing a lot of that. And my mom literally had to get up 3 times to shut the door, and because she was afraid I was going to walk out in the middle of the night and stick, because I had this fascination with the fan, and she was afraid I was going to stick my fingers in the slots and Yeah. So she literally got up a 3rd time, shut the door, said, "Hey, Mr. Ghost," and talked to the ghost and said, "Mr. Ghost, listen, explain the situation. My child, he's learning how to walk. I'm afraid he's going to get up and he's going to, if you can please, we're going to be here for about 30 days. If you can please just let us shut the door and keep it shut for these 30 days, we'll be out of your hair. And I'm just really worried about my son. So please." She got up and shut the door. From that night on, every time she shut the door, now the door in the morning would open back up again when everybody was up. And that was it, stayed open. But at night, she allowed my mom to close door. We found out who he was, allowed the door to be shut and for the night so I wouldn't get in trouble.
Oh, that's amazing.
But to answer your question, going there, I got into it. I've always been into it. And when I was about 18 years old, when I was about 15 years old, I had a girlfriend who was actually very much into Wicca and Witchcraft. And I was like, okay, well, at the time I was ironically enough, oh, whatever, And And then when I was about 18 years old, I all of a sudden, just like I was working as a bouncer in a game room, and all of a sudden I just I had this like interest. I don't know what it was. Like the goddess just kind of came and said, "Hey, you know what? You're gonna do this." And I just all of a sudden had this major interest. I don't know where it came from, how it came about. I kind of had an inkling of it because of this girl that I dated.
Yeah.
But I literally called her, like, and I was like, "Hey, totally into this now. Can I have a few books, on it and whatnot?" And she was like, "Yeah, right, whatever, sure you are, But anyway, it kind of grew from there. And me and her got together and we made after I had studied it for a little while, reading books, like pretty much is the way everybody starts. I called her up one day and I said, "Hey, do you want to do some Sabbats together, some celebrations?" And she's like, "Sure." And we got together and we hit it off and did great. And our friends kind of caught on and they liked it. And they just and all of a sudden, the next thing you know, point being, within a year, I have this coven, this eclectic coven.
Wow.
And we just kept working from there. And then ultimately, 10 years down the road, I joined a Gardnerian Coven, which is a traditional coven, as opposed to an eclectic coven. And carried it on from there. And I've just been, Wiccan and teaching others ever since.
So there's so many different types of witches out there. There's pagans, and you're talking about the Wiccan one, which I live near the New Forest I'm in Southampton, but I think it was Gerard Gardner. He was founder of it, wasn't he?
Yeah. So first of all, just to clear up where you said pagan. Pagan is an umbrella term that means anybody who basically, in my definition of it, in my opinion, there'll be others, but the fact is one of the facts is this. Pagan is an umbrella term for any religion that is not under the Abrahamic faith. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, for instance. We don't follow the Abrahamic faiths. So in that sense, paganism falls underneath this umbrella term, Wicca falls underneath this umbrella term of pagan. Okay. So that being said, as far as there being many types of Wicca, yeah, exactly. Gerald Gardner was the first person to, I don't like to say create it, I like to say resurrect it.
It.
Because he first learned his craft from a group of witches back in 1939 is when they discovered him, in a sense. And he carried it on from there. What happened was it's always been an underground religion. It's always been an underground teaching, because of the burning times and things like this. The burning times being like, as a lot of people know, if you've ever heard of like the Salem, Massachusetts, hysteria that happened here in the United States. And of course in Europe, all through all the centuries that they burned witches during the Inquisitions and stuff like that. It went underground. And they had to hide it because it was during a time when all you had to do was point at a neighbor and be like, "That woman owns a black cat. She's a witch." And they would come take you away. And the way the Inquisition in a lot of these situations worked, where they would take witches away, is they asked questions and you were condemned at the start. You were a witch, whether there was no denying it. Just because somebody pointed and said you're a witch, you're done. You are done. There was no getting out of it.
Yeah.
They would literally torture you. So you had these options. One, be tortured to death by denying you were a witch the whole time. Or two, say you're a witch right away and die quickly. So, but once you were gone for the most part, But Gerald had to take it underground, and it stayed, or not him, but his people that taught him had to take it underground. And when he wanted to, and so his idea was, so he was initiated in 1939. In 1951, the last law against witchcraft was repealed in England. Okay. That gave him his opportunity and his chance to now take something that he felt was going to die out and give it to the world. So he started writing books, which his very first book was Witchcraft Today. Second book was The Meaning of Witchcraft. His very first book on Wicca was actually a book called High Magic's Aid, written in 1949. But it was a fictional book that was talking about Wicca and giving pieces of Wicca to the public, but fictionally, so he didn't get taken to jail.
Yeah.
And but because of this, he resurrected what he already knew. And when he asked his elders he said, hey, I want to put this out to the world. They said, absolutely not. They said, we've been in the shadows as long as we have for a reason. And we've been safe so far over the last 100 or 200 years for a reason. We don't want to, even though this law has been repealed, we don't want to shake the hornet's nest. So they said, if you want to do something like this, then you need to change it up some and don't give out exactly what we do and everything else. And, you know, plus don't name us, don't name anything about us and blah, blah, blah. So he did. So he put out some, at that point, documentary style books, non-fictional, that expressed what Wicca was and what it was about. And that he knew for a fact that these things were true because he himself was a witch, which a lot of people couldn't lay claim to back in the day. But he started it, and it was kind of like resurrected through Gardnerian. So what I am is I'm a traditional Gardnerian witch. Because of once he came out with it and it started getting out, other people that were talented as Gardner with writing books, for instance, Doreen Valiente, who was one of his high priestesses, she was a writer as well. So she has multiple books out. Patricia Crowther, another priestess of Gerald Gardner. He had 7 altogether, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. He had 7 altogether. And I'd say half of them write books. So they wrote books themselves. But of course, this went out through the masses, and other people started reading about it and learning about it. And they too started writing books and creating other traditions outside of Gardnerian tradition. The very first tradition of witchcraft to develop off of Gardnerian witchcraft was, for instance, Alexandrian witchcraft, which is very big over in Europe also. Gardnerian and Alexandrian witchcraft both are very big where you're at, very big in England. And it made its way over to the United States in the, I think, late 60s, early 70s. Raymond Buckland, who lived over in England, moved to New York City. When he moved to New York City, him and Gerald got together, and they were like, and Gerald was like, hey, we don't have a big following over in the United States, if any at all. Take this with you and, you know, spread the word. So he did. And like my lineage of witchcraft, I traces back to this New York City where it started. And, you know, and then many traditions are not even necessarily traditions. Traditions a lot also, as well as just other branches of witchcraft. What we would call some of them traditional. What we call British traditional witchcraft means it all traces back to Gardner in some sense, or traces back to something that started over in Britain and came over to the United States, or started over in England and came over to the United States. Then we have eclectic witchcraft, which is all the other stuff. It's basically where people got together, they read some books from Llewellyn, they basically that's it. They read some books from Llewellyn, who is a publisher for most witchcraft books, and they learned what they could, grabbed pieces of everything they liked, put it together, and started a Wicca that they like, which is what I did when I started. When I first got into Wicca, I did that. I read the very first book I ever read on witchcraft was a book called Mastering Witchcraft. And I read that, and I read a couple of other books, and that's where I learned from. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to put together something myself. I'm going to take this, I'm going to take that, and I'm going to build this thing, and just, you know, so I can celebrate, because everything that these books are telling me are ringing out to me, and it's what I believe. So I'm going to do something myself. It wasn't until 10 years after doing that and working with a coven, and the only reason I even ran the coven, it wasn't like I put the coven together and said, I'm going to run a coven. It was all my friends. And in the end, we had this whole thing that, you know, we're all equal. Everything's fine. I don't. But then in the end, what happened was I met a Gardnerian witch at a store. She owned a store in South Florida. And she asked me, she said, this tradition of, you know, what do you call it? I'm like, I don't have a tradition. It's just, you know, witchcraft, you know, Wicca. And she said, well, you got to call it something, because it's, you know, something. It's not what's normal. And, you know, so she kind of talked me into naming it. And then I said, but I'm not a priest in that or anything like that. And she said, well, really? She goes, well, who teaches the coven? And I said, well, I do. She goes, why? And I said, well, because I know the most, you know, me and my wife at the time. And she said, well, I guess that would make you a priest and priestess then, wouldn't it? And I was like, well, yes, but I'm going to fight it. I don't want to be, you know. But in the end, this woman literally introduced me to Gardnerian witchcraft in a traditional sense of witchcraft, which when I went into it, I thought, you're not going to teach me anything that I don't already know. 110% wrong. There's so much in traditional witchcrafts that are not in books. There never will be in books, because it's oath bound. And when I joined that, and that's where I'm at now. That's where I'm in this Gardnerian Witchcraft. And but that's how I got into it. That's my lengthy but try to be quick story.
Oh, it's fabulous. The coven, I mean, excuse me for being ignorant, and I really don't know anything about it. Is it a purpose for being stronger together in spell making, and also what is the purpose of a coven?
So a coven, especially in traditional witchcraft, is necessary. You can't start it. You can't be in it without a coven. And the reason is because in traditional witchcraft, not all in Wicca. Okay. First of all, let me tell you before I answer that question, I need to, because you're going to hear me say Wicca and witchcraft quite often. And I want to be very clear that witchcraft and Wicca are not the same thing. Okay. Wicca is a religion that witches are part of, witches specifically from Europe. Wicca is a European religion that embraces witchcraft. Witchcraft is a practice. You can be a witch in Africa. You can be a witch in South America. You could be a witch in Europe. You could be a witch in Australia. And when I say witch, I'm talking about centuries old. Everybody is different things in different countries. There's witchcraft all over the place. Witchcraft is a person who embraces the elements around them, who embraces nature from around them, and they use it in what's called magic. Okay. Wicca is a religion that was developed from England, or from Britain, we'll say, because it's also or from Europe, because there's also Irish and Scottish Wicca, for instance. And it's developed in, I guess what I'm trying to say is you can be a witch and not be Wiccan, but there's no, in my experience, if you're Wiccan, you're also a witch, if that makes any sense. Like Wicca embraces witchcraft. It's just a European version of witchcraft, So most likely if you're a European witch of any kind, you're most likely a Wiccan, doesn't have to be. You can also just be a witch and not practice the religion of Wicca. Because again, Wicca is a religion. But witchcraft is a practice. But as far as the coven being part of it, when you join traditional Wicca, you can't just be a Gardnerian witch. You can't just call yourself a Gardnerian witch. It's an initiatory practice. Okay. And it always has been an initiatory practice. Alexandrian, Georgian Wicca, Blue Star Wicca, are to name a few more. They're initiatory. The only way you can be a Gardnerian witch is to be made a Gardnerian witch by another Gardnerian witch. And it's always passed down male to female, female to male. There's that. It works like a battery. The way the belief system is that the energy is passed on to each other in a battery form. So you can't have like male to male or female to female. It has to be that negative and positive that creates energy, so to speak. So it always goes male to female, female to male. In the very old days, it was passed down father to daughter, mother to son, things like that. Or in circumstances like that where it was parental, it could even be mother to daughter in that sense, because it was a little bit different, because they were in desperate times where you didn't really have But for the most part, it's always done male to female. That being said, it takes in traditions like this that I'm talking about, it takes a witch to make a witch. But that's not all over. Anybody can be a witch. You can, like I said, pick up a couple of books, read some stuff. It's the way I started.
Yeah. Put
your own thing together. I will consider you just as much a witch as anybody else. So don't let what I say about in traditional witchcraft, where it takes a Wiccan to make a Wiccan, is what I should say. But again, they're kind of the same thing in traditional. Outside of traditional, you can just read some books and figure it out yourself. And I don't see you any less than I see my brothers and sisters of what I'm part of. But because of this, there's always a coven involved, because it's more than one person. A coven is basically a group of Wiccans or witches that come together and work together. There's pros and cons to all of it. As a coven, the pros are that, again, like you said, there's strength in numbers.
Yeah.
Two, you learn a lot faster and a lot more because you can run things through other people and get other opinions. You're not relying on yourself in these books that you're reading. And there's always times when you read these books and everything, when you're learning Wicca and witchcraft, that you have tons of questions. Social media is a godsend in nowadays for that. But it's also got its pros and cons because, to be honest with you, so much of the social media out there, when you get into Wicca and witchcraft, it's all so negative. Meaning that people, I don't know what it is, man. People's egos nowadays are just like off the wall. And it's like the second somebody even says, hi, I've been studying witchcraft, people automatically come back and go, oh, you're a loser. Or, you don't know what you're talking about. And all the person will do is ask a question. It's just amazing. Like social media is inherently, it's got its weird. Social media is weird because, again, I do my Wicca working YouTube channel. Yeah. I make part of my living off of social media. So it has its pros, but at the same time, unfortunately, it has its cons. Being in a coven, same thing, same way, because not only do you get these extra people, but you also have to deal with people's attitudes at that point. And you have to deal with people at that point, and that could be an issue with people. That can be an issue with a lot of people. They don't want to deal with other people. Working solo, what we call solitaire, you don't have, the cons are you don't have the help. You don't have other people to bounce things off of. You literally are going off of what you can teach yourself. You are basically relying on your own knowledge and not being able to ask questions and everything. And you're just kind of figuring it out. And it's very, very slow. It's very slow. I've been there, done it. And I can tell you, I've been solitaire. I've worked with a coven. I've been eclectic. I've been traditional. So I know all sides of the fences. My preference, and I put out to everybody and tell you, if you can do it, is to work with a coven and do your best to try to get with a traditional group, because there's things that you'll learn that you'll never learn out of the books. And not even just a little bit, a shit ton. Is a lot. But at the same time, there's your lone wolves out there who are like, nah, you can keep it. And I respect them just as well. Just know that, there's cons there too. And that, you're not going to get, the pro is that you don't have to deal with people. The con is you're not going to get the same education.
In witchcraft, is it more about the elements, earth, wind, and fire? Is there any sort of ascending masters? I'm gonna put it out there, but is the devil involved or gods involved? Mm-hmm. I don't mean that in any way offensive. I'm just asking a question.
Oh, no. That's a great question. That's actually perfect. So yeah. Wiccans do not believe in the devil. We do not have an all evil. We do not have an all evil entity that is believed in. We believe in a god and a goddess. There's 3 levels to that. There's to break it down. It's the stuff that, and the stuff you're hearing from me right now, by the way, anybody who's out there watching this, be very thankful that these people brought me on, that Sarah brought me on, because you're not going to read this in books. So a lot of this stuff. So with goddess and god worship, there's 3 levels to it. There's one that is not the Abrahamic God, okay? Yeah. Yeah. But there is some pagans basically out there, that very, very, very few, that believe in one God, one force, but it's hermaphroditic. It's hermaphrodite. It's got male and female combined. Okay. But they see it as God and goddess combined, right. Very few people go there. This is like an esoteric belief. Okay. The second level is God and goddess. And this is the masculine and the feminine. Okay. And there's no name. There's no name for them. There's no traits given to them, human traits. There's no what do you call it? Behavioral patterns given to them, like jealousy and mad and sad and stuff like that. It's literally extremely simple. It's a masculine and feminine force. That's it. And it creates everything. And people don't try to they don't try to fathom what they look like or what traits they have. They literally see it as a masculine and feminine force. And this is where I stand. This is where I'm at. And the reason they see it as a masculine and feminine force is because that's what is natural around us. When you walk outside, people will say, oh, no, it doesn't take the masculine and feminine to create. That's a bunch of bull hockey, especially nowadays. A lot of people will say that. When I say challenge, I challenge them. I challenge you to walk outside and look around and tell me what's not created by masculine and feminine that has a heartbeat. Everything that has a heartbeat has a mother and a father. So we kind of put it up to this masculine and feminine force. The third level is all the gods and goddesses that we read about. Zeus, Aphrodite, Caradwin, Cernunnos,
really? That's all in with it. Zeus and Aphrodite, and that's all with. I never knew that.
Yeah, so that's like a third level. So that's the level of where people have taken this masculine and feminine force,
right,
and they've brought it down to a third level where they can't handle not mentally being able to perceive them as just fathomless and like of like this nothingness of like this just masculine and feminine force. They can't handle it. They've got to have them associated to bring it down to their level. They've got to have them associated with our traits, with human traits. So they take these masculine and feminine force and they bring it down to the third level where there's these thousands of gods and goddesses throughout all the many cultures, and they give them. So if you notice, all of these gods and goddesses that are named and given names, they all have traits. They all have human traits. Zeus is jealous and angry and hates all the other gods and wants to throw lightning bolts at them. Aphrodite is all about love and beauty and this and that. They're all human things. I don't believe that. I don't go there because, and I'm very few, and even most Gardnerians don't, a lot of Gardnerians don't even see it the way I do. They like to give them names and everything too. And I'm not against it. It just brings it down to their level. It brings it down to where because they want to be able to associate with those gods and goddesses internally. And the only way to do that for a human being is to give them our internal feelings and behaviors and traits. So they do that, but I don't do it. So that answers like some stuff about the questions with the gods, where we worship a god and goddess. Again, there is no devil because Satanism, the devil, that's a Christian idea.
Whole different ball game there. Another show.
Yeah. Never have worship the devil. Never have. I mean, history will paint that picture, especially during the Inquisition and stuff like that, where they were taking witches. But you have to understand, when they were taking these witches and they were quote unquote what they call engineering them or torturing them, the priests were on the side recording all this information. When they record this information, every single time a witch said, my priestess or my priest or my god or my goddess, they automatically just put in the devil because in their head that was the devil. So they didn't put, and then Lady Jenny said that her and her coven would meet with the high priest and the high priestess of the coven and do circle. They would put Lady Jenny said she got with her coven and met with the devil. So
they're obsessed. Even kings in Britain were obsessed with witches. I think it was King Richard. He was terrified of them, and that's to do with the Pendle Hill witches as well. But half of them were just wise women, or maybe a bit of women with gumption, and you've had a birthmark. That's it. You're a witch. And I think in Boscastle they had a dunking stick where if you was human, you would just drown. Yep. But if you wasn't and you survived, you would get your head chopped up and you were burnt at the stake. So you were buggered either way, wasn't you, to be honest?
Yep. No, it was definitely exactly what I said in the beginning of this whole thing is that once you were taken, you're screwed.
Yeah.
And again, all you had to do was point at your neighbor and give a reason. You didn't even have to have a solid reason. You could simply say, I saw this person. You could simply lie. And the reason people did it, so a lot of people are wondering why would a neighbor do that to another neighbor? Like, what's the point? What is the point of turning in your neighbor and saying this person's a witch? Why would you do that? Because what they don't tell you too is that you get the land.
Yeah.
You turn in a witch, once they're gone, the church said, here, you can have their land. Good job.
Yeah.
So you just basically, took say you have a bank account of, let's put that in today.
Yeah.
So people can understand. Say you have in your savings account $10,000. If you could turn in your neighbor and get their savings account of $50,000, I'm not saying would you do it, because most people won't. But back then, I guess times were rougher. They did. They said, you know what, I need to, I'm doing it. And so they do it.
Can you tell us any history, American history of witches stories?
I mean, the biggest, I think, American history with this. So we have to remember, America is not that old.
200 years.
Yeah, it's not Europe. It's not that old. Where our real stories begin, I think the biggest witchcraft story there is with America is the Salem witch trials, which happened back in the 1690s, where there was a small town, which I forget what it was called. It wasn't Salem, Massachusetts, but it was basically, it's Salem, Massachusetts now. It was renamed. And there was a group of children there who basically started screaming witch, and they started pretending like they were getting like possessed and stuff like that. And in the end, it ended up being where like 300 people, I think close to 300 people were taken and imprisoned. I forget the number of how many people were put to death. I'm gonna say it was in the 30s. Were put to death by being hung. There's a misconception that they were burned at the stake. None of them were burned at the stake. They were all hung. One guy was pressed to death because he refused to admit that his I think it was because he refused to admit that his wife was a witch or something, and he was pressed to death by stones. But that's the biggest thing in America. That's the biggest thing that ever happened witchcraft wise. And ultimately it ended. So I believe it started because of politics, because again, somebody wanted somebody else's position or land, and they literally talked their daughter into doing this asinine thing with screaming witch. And of course, some other children joined in, and even some adults, and it ended up getting way out of control. It lasted about a year. And in the end, what stopped it was one of the hysterical people screaming witch, and they would go into fits. One of the reasons I say hysterical is so they would go into seizures, and they would really just act things out and say they were being possessed. They blamed the actual governor of the city, if I'm not mistaken, and the governor was like, "Whoa, wait a minute, this has gone too far. Okay, wait, it's done." Because I think they either blamed his wife or his daughter for being a witch, and that's where the screw up, and that's where finally. This whole time, this was the guy actually presiding over the trials and condemning everybody to death. And then all of a sudden somebody went, "Oh, your daughter too." And he was like, "Oh, wait, stop. Never mind. It's over."
Jeez. Yeah, he would, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
Sorry. I want to ask you about spell making. Is there all sorts of spells for health, love? What do you actually do them?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Heck yeah. I can show you one.
Oh.
I can show you a piece of one right now.
Oh wow. So what is this one for?
This is a binding where somebody did some nasty to me. Somebody tried to do some nastiness to me.
Oh.
So I bound them. I actually need to go ahead and disassemble that. Actually, you reminded me. Thank you. I think the job is done. I need to go ahead and disassemble that and bury it, and be it done. Because I don't leave the person bound forever. I only bind them as long as they need to be bound until they stop bothering me. Once they stop bothering me, I disassemble it and clear the binding, the spell. But do spells all the time. Absolutely. Again, with a coven solo, that one was solo. I did that by myself. Okay. But usually you'll work with a coven sometimes, and there's tons of spells. You can do spells for prosperity. You can do spells for healing. You can do bindings like that is. You can do spells for fertility, protection. There's and there's tons of different ones. It's just a matter of figuring out what you it's a matter of figuring out how you want to do it. If you want to do it with a coven, if you feel better doing it by yourself. Most traditional witches will do stuff with a coven because, again, there's power in numbers, and we're most comfortable doing it with a coven. In this situation, I did it by myself because most covens don't want to work with bindings and stuff like that. That's a very personal thing.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with people who do spells for people, because nobody can do a spell. So part of what's making a spell is your intention and your feelings and your emotions and everything about you that's going into the spell. Nobody can duplicate that energy like you yourself can, because you're the one in life being affected by it. So to pay other people to do a spell for you, it's never going to be as powerful as you doing it yourself.
Can you think it and feel it like you're in a power? For example, when I was carrying my children, I wanted them to have blue eyes. My son, my eldest, has blue eyes from his father's side. I wanted my other child, my middle child, to have my eyes, and wow, born with brown eyes. And then my youngest was born with green eyes. So do you feel that you can conduct something if you really want something in yourself, in your own mind? Could that be part of a witch?
There is no limits to what a spell can do. You can make a spell do literally anything. I mean, I can give you an example. You would think like doing a spell for invisibility would not work, because what the heck? Who's going to walk around invisible?
Yeah.
But it really does. And what I mean by that, so you don't think I'm a lunatic or that I'm crazy, it's not that you literally turn invisible and you can walk in and rob a bank or something. You know what I'm saying? But what happens is, if you do a spell for like invisibility, it makes it where you can get by and you can get through things without being noticed as much. I did an invisibility spell for myself back when I was in my early 20s, and I've never taken it off myself. And to this day, every time I'm in a situation where I walk up to somebody or I do something and somebody doesn't notice me, and I literally sit there and I'm like, how is this person not noticing that I'm here? You know, I'm like, I don't know, you're walking up behind somebody in Walmart or something, and like you're trying to get around them, and you're literally stomping and everything, like for the person to move over, like, hey, get out of my way, I'm trying, and they just don't recognize, and you're like, how in the hell? And then I always think back, one of these days, and I say to myself, literally, one of these days, I've got to like reverse that, like that invisibility spell, because it's still obviously still like. But no, you can do like things like this where, say you want to do something where you're not noticed. Like, say you want to do something where, I don't know, you have a job or something where you don't want to necessarily stand out in the crowd because it means they call you out on something. You could totally do an invisibility spell and not be as noticed as much. It's not that you're actually invisible, but it kind of draws the attention away from you. Any energy that would bring a person's attention to you is kind of pushed to the side, and and less noticeable.
I could do with a confidence spell.
Very, very, very good.
Yeah.
I think confidence, you could, something you can do for confidence, take a red candle, get a red cylinder candle, and those ones that they call those 7-day candles that are like yay big. Get a red one, draw on it on the outside on the glass with a black magic marker, put all kinds of symbols on it that represent confidence for you, and that represent, even the word confidence and anything that would represent being confident. Take it one evening, preferably when the moon is waxing, which means when the moon is growing it to full. Best case on a full moon itself, once the moon is full. Take that candle, draw on it with a magic marker all these symbols on the outside glass of all of these things that make you confident, that would give you confidence, that you feel would give you confidence. Put it down on a pentagram, draw a pentagram with a circle around it on a piece of paper. On that piece of paper, also draw symbols and things. Put the candle on it, light the candle, and then concentrate energy into it of being confident, and then let the candle burn out. If you can, don't put it out. Let it burn all the way out. Let it burn its 7 days, and I guarantee that'll work for you.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to try that. Thank you so much. Oh, it's lovely. Oh, fantastic. I was going to ask you another question. Oh, where was I? In the coven, spell making. Okay, yes. So my dad used to tell me a story. He was in the army back in the 50s and his train got cancelled. So he was walking back through woodlands up north somewhere and he could hear all this chanting and he saw a fire and he saw a load of naked people pegging it around a fire chanting. And it's like, he said, I think there were a bunch of witches. He said he never was so frightened in his life. He just pegged it. He just ran all the way to the next village. Is this a real thing? Do you guys get naked and run around a fire chanting? What is the purpose of this if you do?
Okay. Yeah, it is actually. Yep.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a traditional, as a British traditional Wiccan, Gardnerian to be specific, it's a skyclad tradition. It's an initiatory tradition, like I mentioned earlier. It has an initiatory degree system. We have 3 degrees. You start off in the United States. You start off as what's called pagan or outer court, where you work a year and a day with a coven, but you wear a robe. But on your initiation night, you're skyclad, what's called skyclad, which is clad only by the sky. In other words, you're naked. You're totally butt ass naked, not a stitch of clothing, no underwear, nothing. No, I'm not going to paint a picture here. You're just butt ass naked. The way you were born. And you work that way from now on. You work skyclad, naked, when you work with your coven, and when you work your own magic. You don't have to do it when you're by yourself, but you do. A lot of people don't get it. There's reasons behind being skyclad. The 3 reasons are: 1, in our tradition, it's in any witchcraft that's traditional, it's traditional. I guess that's my word I'm trying to find. If you actually look up witches, Google witches in the past, you're never going to see them with clothes on. You're always going to see them naked. It's the way it's done because 2, it takes away from the mundane world. There's actually a famous carving called the Sabbat that involves 4 witches back in like the 17 or 1600s or 50. I think it's actually, no, I'm wrong. It's a 13th century carving. So you can see this goes way back, because when I say 13th century, I mean 1200 something, where there's these 4 women that are witches in the carving, and they're undressing, they're getting naked, and the only thing they're still wearing are their hats. And their hats, especially back then, declared what their class was, whether they were a peasant or whether they were a person of means and money and stuff like that. And what is symbolic about the carving is, from the neck down, these women are all the same, except for these hats that they're wearing. And by their hats they're wearing, you can see that the one woman's a peasant, one woman's middle class, one woman's very upper class. And hence, which brings about the second point of being skyclad in circle. It releases all mundane ego from you when you're in circle. The circle is a place between the worlds. It's a place for the gods and for you to come together. There is no ego in the circle. There is no rich and poor in the circle. Everybody's the same. So what better way for everyone to be the same in circle than naked? You know, and for you guys out there, I know what you're thinking automatically. You're like, well, we're not all created or equal. I say grow up. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about things like that. I can say one thing, because a lot of people actually think that. They think, oh, well, can't that be judgmental? Because everybody thinks that. The second day you walk into with I don't know, say 8 to 10 people, other people naked, they might say, well, they're going to be looking at me and they're going to be judging me and how I look. Does not happen. And it's never happened to me. And I've been doing working skyclad for 21, 22 years. I've never been judged in circle. It just doesn't happen. And I've seen all shapes and body sizes and everything else. And it's like one of my priestesses once told me years and years ago, everybody looks divine in candlelight.
All cats look the same in the dark.
but yeah, we work skyclad. And another reason is so you have that it is one. So another reason they say, which I don't agree with, some books you'll read and stuff. This is bullcrap though. But I want you to know it's bullcrap when you read it. Is they say that the clothing hinders the magic. That's not true. If you're doing a spell and you're sending magic 1,000 miles away, do you really think a thin piece of clothing is going to hinder that? It doesn't. So anytime you read about that, about, oh, clothing hinders the magic, that's crap. That's bull crap. That's not true. I promise you. And to be skyclad, sorry for interrupt you.
That's fine.
The other thing is, once you've worked skyclad, it is unlike anything else. I can't even begin to explain it. Once you get used to it, I could never. It's very hard for me to work robed. There is times I have to work robed in circles because, like, when I go to public circles or I go to stuff that isn't necessarily Gardnerian, which I do all the time, I have to wear a robe. But to work naked, even by yourself, even if you try it by yourself, it is unbelievably so much more extreme than when you're wearing clothes.
Nice breeze. I was going to ask you, working in the paranormal world. Now we come across witches quite regular. Do you think it's because of the power of the supernatural in a being? Why these witches? I'll give you a prime example. There's a place in Kent called the Cage, which was a jailhouse for witches, and it's absolutely rife with paranormal activity. The walls bleed. There's like beings being seen all over the place. Do you think that it's because witches are just more powerful? The spirits are stronger.
Well, I mean, in witchcraft, just so you know, like, okay, so let's talk about like the paranormal Cincinnati in ghosts and things like that. Let's go there. So in witchcraft, first of all, what we believe in reincarnation.
Okay.
In Wicca, we believe in reincarnation. We believe in the cycles of everything. Part of what Wicca is believing in this masculine and feminine force and in the cycles of nature. The cycles of nature being the seasons. We worship the seasons. We have 8 Sabbats in a year, 8 holidays that we celebrate, and all of them revolve around the seasons and what are called the quarters and the cross quarters. So we celebrate the autumn equinox. We celebrate the summer solstice. We celebrate the winter solstice and the spring. And there's 4 points in between these that we also celebrate. They're called the greater Sabbats and the lesser Sabbats. The lesser Sabbats are these equinoxes and solstices. The greater Sabbats are these other ones, which are Beltane. I think all 8 Sabbats we have are Imbolg, Ostara, Beltane, Midsummer, Lammas, Mabon, Samhain, and Yule. Okay. And what we celebrate these things, and they're all cyclical. Everything is cyclical. Once a month, we celebrate, for instance, the cycle of the moon as well. And this is done once a month. And this is called an Esbit. So we have Sabbats, which celebrate the sun, and we have Esbits that celebrate the moon. So once a month, we celebrate the moon. And what we're doing is we're celebrating the full moon. Some covens celebrate the new moon as well, which is when the moon's at its darkest. It's like there's no light in the sky. It's totally dark. There's no sliver at all. The full moon is obviously the full moon. Everybody knows the full moon. Not many people know the new moon. Most witches, we celebrate the full moon. And if you go back and you look at a book, there's a book written in 1897, I think. It's called It's from Charles Leyland. It's called Aradia or Aradia or Aradia, Gospel of the Witches. And there's actually a charge of the goddess in that book that talks about witches. And this man, the author who put it together, says he went through a village and he got this information from witches that were in this Italian village. It was from Italian witchcraft. And the charge of the goddess says it all. It says, she says in that charge that we celebrate once in a month, better it be when the moon is full, and to show that you shall truly be free from the mundane and truly be free from man and its chains, ye shall be naked in your rights. Again, something written in the 1800s about skyclad, you know.
Yeah.
And we celebrate these cycles. I'm sorry, what was the question?
About well, we come across witches in paranormal. They always seem to come across as stronger.
Right. So we believe in reincarnation, which is another cycle of life, because we believe in birth, death, and rebirth. That was my point with the cycles.
Yes.
And the so because we believe in rebirth, so you're saying like when you go to these places where the walls are bleeding and stuff like that and everything?
Yeah, it was known for like a
Witches
jail.
being tortured and killed,
being
probably.
tortured and killed, yeah, and it's really rife with paranormal activity, and they do feel that it could be the witches in there. Why it's so a hive of paranormal activity, and I was just wondering.
Okay, so I have an answer for that.
Right.
Being a witch, and being what I know witches were taught for centuries, I would say that none of those ghosts were actually witches.
Right.
I'd say that those ghosts were probably good Christian people that were put to death wrongly for under the guise of witchcraft.
Well said.
And that's why that happens there, because these people are still hurting and they're still seeking their ghosts.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I have a thing with ghosts. My definition, the difference between a ghost and a spirit, is that a ghost is a being that once was living and lost their life and is still searching for something. There's something that they didn't complete. There's something that they didn't finish that they're still searching for. A spirit, in my opinion, is somebody who lost their life, died, but they were complete. And a spirit can come and go as they please. For instance, in the thing, like, you only see spirit, like you'll see spirits a lot in spirit activity, a lot in situations where there was like old ballrooms or places that were fun, where these spirits have actually gone on to the next level, but they're choosing to come back to re-experience good times.
Yeah.
Whereas a ghost has unfinished business.
Yeah.
And they're still seeking it.
Perfectly.
Hence, I think the things that you're talking about were probably good Christian people who were put to death under this guise and are still looking for a release.
Fantastic. That's a brilliant answer. Do witches believe in spirits and
Absolutely,
and things like that?
not just spirits, spirit worlds.
Spirit world.
Absolutely. So witches have common practices. I don't know about all witches. I can't speak for all, but I can say in my practice in Gardnerian Witchcraft, we actually have full practices where we work with for months at a time, traveling to different spirit worlds and working with spirits in the Fey realm and different astral realms. And I'm meeting these beings and working with them.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Oh, we was having a conversation earlier about mediums. I think I worded it like it's a gift to be a medium. Do you feel like there's elements of being a witch in that as well? Is it your personal opinion?
I mean, as far as being a medium, so obviously in witchcraft, one of the again, I'm talking Gardnerian witchcraft,
Right?
as a traditional witch, one of the requirements is you have to learn and become very fluent in a divination, in a mediumship of some sorts, whether it's tarot cards, runes, scrying. Me personally, I lay hands. Like I like actually put my hands, like I'll hold a person's hand and I can read their energy and read their future and their past and what they're going through and everything else. And there's many different forms of divination. Tea leaves, I mean, everything. Reading smoke that you put on a paper from a candle, and it all works out great. It's all something that is not just a gift. So some people has it as a gift. Some people are born with it. Some people are lucky enough to be born with this gift. Some might say not lucky. It depends on who they are. It can be a gift where you're born just naturally great at it. And good for you. Awesome. Wonderful. You were probably a witch in a past life. Because again, believing in reincarnation, another thing is witches believe once a witch, always a witch.
Wow.
You're reborn as a witch again, and again. And there's no getting at it. That's just the way it is. But some people have a harder time. So first of all, just so you know, having the gift of divination, of mediumship, what you're calling mediumship, I'm going to call divination.
Okay. Yeah.
So having this gift of being able to see, being able to read energy from the past, the future, the present, either way, because it doesn't just have to be the future. It can be present energy even. Being able to read that energy is inherent in everybody. Every single person who's alive who's born, it has this gift. They all have it. It's a matter of knowing how to find it and awaken it. It's just like muscles. People who don't work out at the gym, they don't have big muscles. But if you work out at the gym, you get big muscles.
Yeah.
Your divinatory skills are the same thing. They all are in all of us. Some of us are born with bigger muscles than others, with bigger divination skills than others. Some of us have to work at it, and some of us have to exercise those skills. And most of us, to be honest. So don't feel like the minority is definitely the ones who are born strong at it.
Yeah.
Bottom line. I myself, I had to work at it. I started off with tarot cards, and then ultimately I developed into laying of hands because I just figured it out over time. I stopped using the tarot cards, and I started being able to see more by just touching the person than the tarot cards could give me.
Yeah.
So you kind of develop your own thing. And everybody inherently has this ability. It's a matter of finding what's yours and working it out and getting better at it. And that's with everything. That's with magic, everything out there that has to do with all these special things that people think are special and nobody else can do. We're all born with it. It's a matter of just working it out.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Hexing. Is it a real thing? Is the pointing and the cursing, can it be done? Is it done?
No, hexing, absolutely, it's real. Absolutely,
is it?
it's real. Okay. Absolutely. Are you kidding me? Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I mean, for the most part, most witches do positive things. Most people who cast spells, they do more on the positive side of things. But when it comes to hexings, they are the minority of what people will do. I can guarantee that. A lot of times, I mean, the fact is, when you're doing magic, you got to put a lot of energy into it. You got to put a lot of energy. And there's that's like a whole nother, working magic is a whole nother conversation. But sometimes it's easier for people just to ignore or to just do something mundanely to fix their situation than to actually do the magic for a hexing. But like I showed you that binding that I just did. To me, in this situation, it was a lot more applicable for me to do that binding than it was to just forgive and forget and just whatever. That being said, they're absolutely real. There's different categories of hexes. You have like what they call you have what they call like hexes. You have what they call jinxes, and you have what they call there's bindings. So a binding isn't really a hex like what I showed you. A binding is literally something that is basically you're basically keeping the person from doing harm to you or anyone else.
Yes.
Most of the time yourself. You're basically just taking the person and you're not putting something bad on them. You're simply saying, "Hey, I'm binding you from doing you more shitty things to me."
Yeah.
Or to whoever you're doing it to. And then, like I said, after due time, you unbind them. And there's multiple ways to do that. But hexes absolutely exist. And they lead into what's called the threefold law, which everybody sees out there. A lot of people associate Wiccans as this peace-loving white lighter thing.
Yeah.
So far from the truth.
Really?
So far from the truth. Listen, Llewellyn, again, this publishing. If you go to Barnes and Nobles and buy a book on witchcraft, most likely it's going to be put out there by the publisher Llewellyn. They tend to really like to stick around white lighter type crap with Wicca, especially in traditional witchcraft and Wicca. It is everything but white lighter. It is the farthest thing. It's like I tell people, the absolute last thing you want to do is piss off a Gardnerian witch, for instance, because you will suffer for it. I mean, we don't take shit. As a matter of fact, I take the whole term of Wicca. It somehow got adapted. It got taken by Llewellyn and readapted to that whole saying that says, "And it harm none, but do as you will."
Yeah.
The real saying should be, "And it harm none, but take no shit."
Yeah.
Because that's the reality of it. That's the reality of most witches. Yeah, we don't want to purposely go around hurting people, but God forbid you do something to us, because we will retaliate.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Can we bind Putin, maybe?
I know, right?
Can we do a collection of witches and
I'm sure witches have done spells towards that. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll give you a famous story, that goes around back in the day is when Gerald Gardner himself was resurrecting this craft back in the 40s, or this is back when he was still working with the Coven before he started resurrecting it. And World War II is going on. There's a whole story about how him and a group of witches actually went out and did a thing to repel the Germans from England's shore so that they would never set boots on ground, and invade England. Yeah, it didn't happen. It worked, apparently, because no German ever set boots on England.
Oh. Well, Mussolini kicked out Aleister Crowley, didn't he? And he's one of the most evilest men on earth and all.
Oh, yeah, Crowley. Crowley's a whole nother interview.
Oh.
And I don't know a whole lot about Crowley. I know a little bit about Crowley. I can tell you that Aleister Crowley was one of the major influences of the occult world that we have today. But he was a character, and he was definitely a man who a lot of people are kind of like take with a 50-50 type deal, where half of his energy was awesome, the other half was kind of like a little bit crazy, a little bit nutso. But I can say that if it was not for Aleister Crowley, even with influences to Gardnerian witchcraft and Wicca as we see it today, Wicca in any form it is as today, without Crowley, it wouldn't be what it is today. He had a big influence on Wicca. He had a big influence on witchcraft in a sense. Not I shouldn't even say that. I wouldn't say huge influence, but some of his studies had an influence on witchcraft. And Gerald Gardner himself met with Aleister Crowley a couple of times to go over things. And Crowley actually so Crowley's big for creating what's called the OTO, which is another occult system called the Ordo Templi Orientis. And he wanted Gardner, he saw how well Gardner was doing with Wicca and passing it to the world. And he wanted Gardner to grab hold of the OTO and do the same. The OTO concentrates very much on the masculine forces and God type worship. Gardner didn't like that. He was more of a god and goddess type guy, because Wicca practices with a 50-50 deal with the god and goddess, and more so towards the goddess. Wicca, very much on many levels, in many traditions and many systems, is very feminine. It's more of a feminine thing. It gives power to women, very much so. It's any person who is Wiccan, for the most part, is most likely a feminist at the same time. I myself, most of the men in witchcraft are feminists. We look very strongly upon the goddess and about women's rights and and again, it's like in Gardnerian witchcraft, the high priestess has the final say.
Yeah.
If there's an argument in the craft and there's something going on in a Gardnerian witchcraft coven, the priestess in the end says, "That's it. I'm saying this and that's that. And that's it. That's final." So it's said a long time ago, Crowley joined witchcraft back in the day. And the rumor goes that he quit because he, quote unquote, would not be ruled by any damned woman.
He was very sexualized as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, he loved sex.
Yeah, Rolling Stones worshipped him, didn't they?
Yeah, men, women, he didn't care. He was all for it. He was just about whatever it involved.
The craziest thing I read about him is how he sacrificed the goat while it was doing his missus, and I'm thinking, why don't you screw the goat, Crowley, and whistle at the goat, and whistle at his neck? It's like, why did she have to screw the goat?
That's new to me. That one, that's new, but I wouldn't doubt it. I'll be honest with you. I am a first degree initiate in the OTO.
Mm-hmm.
and as a little side project I took on over the years. And I've literally had people from the OTO, like, and this is a public thing. So one of the things the OTO will do is they'll do what's called a Gnostic Mass, and it's for the public. Anybody can come watch it. And one of the things that the leaders will tell you, at least that I witnessed, was that they'll say, okay, Aleister Crowley, and this is their dude. This is their dude.
Yeah.
Is like, he's a complete asshole.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, and then they'll go on from there. So, you know,
He was on heroin as well, wasn't he?
yeah, he was a heroin addict. Yeah.
Yeah.
When Crowley met with Gardner to discuss like different things, when he was making Gardner an honorary OTO person before Gardner, literally, well, I don't know if I finished that. Gardner quit the OTO. He only did it for a couple of months, and then he stopped because he said it wasn't his cup of tea. It was too God oriented. There was not enough goddess in it, and it was kind of away from what he was trying to put out there. He went back to focusing 100% on Wicca.
Yeah.
But he met with Gardner a few times, and the couple of times he met with Gardner, he was actually on his deathbed and was still a heroin addict at the time, because he met with Gardner while Gardner was basically in what was the equivalent of a nursing home.
Yeah.
Or sorry, Gardner met Crowley where Crowley was basically in what was the equivalent of a nursing home. It was on his last days.
Yeah. It's only my personal opinion. When he was on his second honeymoon with his wife, he decided to go to Egypt, and he went into the Egyptian pyramids and decided to conjure up a whole new and read out the Book of the Dead and things like that. And I thought it was a bit of a mockery of the Egyptian heritage that he was doing there. But that's only my personal opinion.
Yeah. I think he was in there. I think the story is he was in there for like 3 or 4 days. I forget what it was, but he was there for like 3 or 4 days straight.
Yeah.
And he basically, and that's where, if I'm not mistaken, the text that came from that intervention was was his version of this Lesser Key of Solomon. So the Lesser Key of Solomon is a book about 72 demons that came about some years before Crowley, but Crowley did this whole thing with these demons in Egypt, like you're saying, and he kind of rewrote the book. He kind of put his version of what these demons were and what they looked like and what they represented and stuff like that.
He tried to conjure up one in Boscombe House, didn't he, in Loch Ness? Some people think he's responsible for the Loch Ness monster, but he had to go for days on bread and water, and he gave up because he went and got a burger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those practices are so extreme. They are intense. It's like witches. It's like one of the things witches like to say is that you can be a ceremonial magician, and you can do a working as a ceremonial magician, and you can, because that's ultimately what Crowley was a ceremonial magician. He wasn't a witch. And you can do this thing where you wait for the exact right time, and the exact time, in the exact date when this planet crosses with that planet, and at the exact time of Mercury where Venus is in retrograde of this, and on the hour of this and that, which sometimes you might have to wait 6 or 7 months to do this working for the exact timing to be right. And with these extremes to perform this magic. Or you can be a witch and do your spells and get the same exact effect in a couple of days.
Yeah.
I mean, however long it takes, sometimes instantaneous, it's just different strokes for different folks. Some people want to wait all that, and they want to put that because they feel like it's more powerful.
Yeah.
And then there's those of us that are just like, more on a naturistic level, on a simplistic level. Hence, a lot of witchcraft is folk magic. It doesn't go off of these. Ceremonial magicians in the past were very, very rich people. To perform ceremonial magic, you had to have gold this and gold that and this and stuff that just folk magicians, that folk people couldn't come up with. They didn't have money for that kind of stuff, Their idea was to alchemy and ceremonial magicians, and to raise certain things that were very, very that took very, very a lot of attention and a lot of energy, where they were spending a lot of money and calling on demons and calling on these things to help them. Or you can make a circle and go off into a field with nature and the god and goddess and what's around you, which I believe is super, super powerful. What's more powerful than the moon and the sun and nature itself? You tapping into these forces and tapping into these powers, bringing them to a controlled energy, and utilizing it. To me, that's more powerful than waiting for a specific time and date because you decided to stress yourself out for a specific situation to occur. But that's my opinion too. So,
is there offerings and sacrifice involved in the
Wiccan? In Wicca,
neither.
Well, right. So in Wicca, there is no sacrifice. You don't do stuff like that. We don't sacrifice animals. We don't sacrifice people or anything like that. Because we kind of you just don't see a need for it. There is blood magic. There is certain times where they'll do blood magic, but it's your own, and it involves pricking your finger. There's no sacrifice there. You grab a lancet. You test for diabetes because I recommend that instead of a needle. It's a lot less painless, by the way, just for anybody out there, whoever wants to do it. You prick your finger and you do your thing. I come from South Florida, for instance. We have hurricanes that used to come through South Florida all the time. So every time a hurricane would come through, I'd get my coven together and we do a little blood magic to push the hurricane away, to make it go away. And it never failed. It always worked.
And offerings. Do you do offerings to, I don't know, I think Halloween has something to do with that, doesn't it? Oh, I read somewhere. Offerings, fruit and veg and things like that.
Well, we do offerings. We'll do offerings, especially in, we'll do offerings from time to time, especially during a circle where you put a bowl out and there's things that are done that involve taking food and wine, for instance, that we ingested during the circle, putting it in a bowl for libation. And then afterwards you take that bowl and you take it out to your backyard or to wherever you're practicing and you dump it on the ground. And in essence, dumping that on the ground, and you say some words too. And in essence, you're dumping that and you're libating to the earth at the same time. That's the sacrifices. That's the sacrifice we will make. And that's the offerings we will make. And, you do those offerings and nature eats it to us. Sometimes we'll leave a plate of food out and then come the next day, it's gone. Now we know that a physical god and goddess didn't come take the stuff away and take it away. But to us, because we see god and goddess in everything, when the birds and the possums and the raccoons come and eat that food, to us, that's the god and goddess taking that food and accepting our offering.
No, that's lovely thought. It's nice. I've had nearly over an hour of your time now, but I was going to ask you some cheeky, goofy questions, if I may, and whether or not they're relevant to Wicca. Okay, right. So this might sound daft,
but
I'm going to throw it out there. Broomsticks, black cats, and flying. Are any of these relevant to Wiccan?
So the broomsticks, yes. Broomsticks we totally use as a tool for clearing, as a tool for clearing negativity. We'll use what's called a besom. We call it a besom. And we'll use it at the beginning of circles to sweep out an area. And what it is all it is a symbolic, not physical. It's a symbolic cleansing of negative energy before we cast a circle. And there's usually words that are said with it. In the old days, where it comes with witches flying on brooms, where that comes from is in the old days, there was an old tradition where women would grab a broom and they would go out to the crops. Because again, we're talking about a religion of the peasants.
Yeah.
Wicca wasn't a religion of the rich people and stuff. It was mostly of the peasants and whatnot. And they would run out and they would do what's called symbolic magic. Symbolic magic is like attracts like. So they would run out with their broomsticks and they would jump up and down in the fields as high as they could to show the crops how high to grow. Onlookers would see this and think that the witches were trying to fly on their broomsticks. Wow. So that's where the falsity comes in. Second theory, I don't believe this, is that there was something called flying ointment. That's real. Flying ointment is real. It's a hallucinogenic, and it's an ointment that they would put. Some people say they would put it on the end of a broomstick and then shove it up their butts or whatever. And then in order to get the ointment to ingest into their body, and it would become a hallucinogen, and then they would be flying to a Sabbath or something, or a nearby Sabbath. They would said that it would help them to leave their body astrally to be able to visit other people and stuff like that. I don't believe that. I believe the flying ointment's real, and I believe that if they did shove it in any kind of crevice, it was with their finger. Why would you stick a twig up your butt? Seriously.
No, you wouldn't.
You would probably use your finger, if anything. But they would take this flying ointment and they would put it under their arms or on their wrists or on their neck in pulse points where it would ingest into their skin and do it. And then they would sit in front of a chimney to sweat. And the sweat would ultimately control the hallucinogenic because they would start to sweat it out. Hence, they also have a lot of, you'll see a lot of history in paintings and carvings and stuff where witches are flying on brooms out of a chimney in order to get to their location. That's where all that stems from. They weren't really flying out of a broom with their chimney. They were using this ointment, and they would sit next to a hearth to sweat it out next to the fire. Black cats. I don't know. Speaking of cats,
You've got a cat.
yeah, this is my fatty.
Oh, cute. Beautiful eyes.
But I gotta. But she's but the black cats really come from. Let me let her out real quick. Sorry. Otherwise, we sit there listening to her meow the whole time. So the black cat is probably comes from the witch's familiar, which is in today I work with. Actually, we do a class where I work with witches familiars on how to get us a familiar, but more a spirit familiar, not a animal familiar. But it's been known throughout time, through the centuries, that they say that sometimes witches would have a witch's familiar, and that's where the black cat comes into to play.
No, so it's all true.
Yeah.
I always assumed that the flying thing could have been something to do with astral projection, but
It totally did. You're absolutely right.
Oh well, that's fantastic. I think one last question: witches from past and present. If you could sit down and have a cup of witch's brew with any witch that really sort of inspires you, who would it be?
Gerald Gardner.
Oh, I knew that question already.
Yeah. Yeah.
I googled him today. He was a wee man. He had a beard.
Yeah. He exactly was that, but he was also so inspirational. And anybody who met him who's still alive, which is very few people, there's only one high priestess he had that is still alive today, and that's Patricia Crowther.
Oh,
and she lives in England. And she's in her 80s now. I think maybe even 90s by now. But I spoke with her a couple of times, and my witch queen has been to her place quite a few times to copy from her BOS, from her Book of Shadows.
Wow.
Which anytime a witch copies from another witch's Book of Shadows, it's in by hand, and it's the Book of Shadows never leaves your home. So she had to actually travel to Patricia Crowther's home to hand copy from her Book of Shadows to learn more about witchcraft and from how Gardnerian anyhow.
It's amazing. It's all so interesting. I'm so going to Google a load of stuff tonight and all those names that you've popped up. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. I hope I had good information for people.
Yeah, it's great. I come out very knowledgeable. Thank you ever so much, Mannun.
No problem.
You're right to plug your YouTube channel or anything else?
Yeah. So everything we just talked about and more, I have a YouTube channel called Witch in the Working, which I think you'll probably have a link to it somewhere.
Yeah.
And it just basically is everything we just talked about and more. I think I've got 77 videos out right now. The last video I just put out on Sunday was about sex magic, so run over there and check it out. Everybody wants to know about sex magic, and it's me talking on them and just giving lessons in Wicca and witchcraft. It's all about Wicca and witchcraft.
And guys, if you want to go on a ghost hunt, just look us up on www.portalstotheparanormal.co.uk. We've got a few going down the bottom here. We've got another East Drive, I think, the Haunted Antiques shop. Is fabulous. I think that's a sleepover as well. We've also got Oxford Castle, which is a sleepover where they have the jails and the castle bit. So it's amazing. So thank you very much.
And I even have a video on my channel I don't know what episode it is, but it's on ghost hunting.
Oh,
Yeah, totally.
well,
My thoughts on ghost hunting, and I even go over some tools and stuff that I use myself, because I myself am an avid paranormal investigator. So yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Well, you know, if you're ever in the UK, look us up.
Absolutely.
Join us.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah. What's your favorite method in ghost hunting?
Well, it used to be EVPs.
Yeah.
I used to be big time into EVPs because they produced more for me than anything. But I'll tell you, I had this camera that I bought way back in the 90s. It was a Sony Mavica, and it used these 3.5-inch. Remember the 3.5-inch floppy disks?
Yeah.
And it's a digital camera, but it used one of these, and that camera produced so many orbs for me. It was not even funny. It was like so accurate, and I've never found another camera that beat it in its day. And I still have that camera. I haven't done ghost hunting in quite a while. But recently I went ahead and I purchased, because I had to see it in action, and I used it, and it works. An SLS camera.
Oh yeah, they're really good.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love the SLS camera. You know, with the stick figures and the lasers. You know, if I'm totally love it. Love that. I love watching the videos where there's a guy somewhere where he lives in a haunted house, so he's able to test out a lot of stuff, and he literally like uses an SLS camera, and he's in a room with it going, and he literally has the ghost appear next to him, and he's like, "Can you reach out and touch my hand?" And you watch the figure reach out and touch him and everything, and it's amazing.
Oh, a good one is Ghosts of Carmel, Maine. Have you heard of him? Kent Brewis.
No.
Oh man, really good. He lives in this little town, and he lives in the house. It's called the Lamb House, the old Lamb House. And he's had a full-on apparition sitting on his bed. Something at the window, shoot out the window. He's caught all that stuff.
Is that with like an SLS camera?
He just uses his own Sony little camera.
Oh wow!
And he actually had a full-on, I call him a full-on MFG, a mother ghost, sat on his bed.
That's crazy.
The links. Yeah,
there's another one I watch quite often. It's a guy who, again in England, and he's British, and he has. It might even be the same guy. I don't know, but I know that in the thing he posts all the time these ghosts. And because his house is haunted, but with a poltergeist. It's very active, very destructive, throws things around, floats stuff up in midair. Pushed him one time. He opens up his door in the video. He's got like cameras that sit like that he set up, you know. He opens up a door, and this thing literally shoves him across the room, and he crawls his way back over and shuts the door and just leans up against the door, and the whole time the door is just banging and stuff for like a good, like an hour, and he's literally talking to it like, please, move on, stop, But then he ultimately gets arrogant because his wife and his kids move out, but he stays. And this is a YouTube. I'm talking. He has active videos as of 2021. You
send me his link. Oh, I'd love to have a look.
Oh my gosh, it's so intense. I happened to roll upon it, and he's got dozens of videos, where he literally just has like things happening. He has things that sit in the doors opening by themselves at 3:00 in the morning, and he has one where the stool. He has a stool in front of his, and he's not even downstairs. He's upstairs sleeping. It happens at like 3:00 in the morning. It's weird. I'm sure that like they say that like a lot of activity happens. I mean, in these hours of like 3 in the morning and whatnot.
The witching hour, as they call it.
Yeah, and he has like where he literally films like this like stool, or I think it's a chair or whatever. It just like floats up into the air and hovers there for a second, and then like throws across the room. It's insane, and I really believe the guy because one, you can see his honest to goodness fear when a lot of this stuff is happening. Two, a lot of this stuff happens without him being there. Yeah. It's like it's in the wee hours of the morning where he literally just set up cameras in different locations of the house to record things because crap was happening so often. He thought, why not record it, and get what's happening. But he ultimately starts getting like arrogant and starts getting like where he's like telling the ghost and talking to the ghost, hey, I'm really sick of you, effing with me and stuff like that. And he literally calls this being out and stuff and watches stuff. He goes, can you do it again? Can you do it? And literally things will just like happen like right there, in the room with him. It's insane. Oh yeah, I'll try to find it to you and send you the link. It's
yes, please.
Yeah.
Because you're in New England, aren't you? Because a lot of things.
Yes. I was born and raised in South Florida, lived there my whole life. I'm 49 years old, right? No. Yeah. I'm 49 years old. Holy crap. I'll be 50 in December. And I lived my whole life up until 8 months ago in South Florida. I was born and raised in the same house, always lived there. Came up to South Florida, or came up to New England, moved up here. Love it. Went to Salem a couple of times, and things are it's just so much better up here. Like Florida, you know, I said America's young. South Florida is very young. Like South Florida didn't get established till the 1950s.
No.
You know, let's be real. So coming up here, where you walk into a house that was built in 17 something, blows me away.
Definitely. That's where Ed and Lorraine Warren started off. They were up that New England strip, wasn't they? The New England Society. Was it Paranormal Society? Yeah. And there's so much up there. Like you got the Lizzie Borden house. You've got Amityville up there, haven't you? You've got the Conjuring House in Rhode Island. I think it's Rhode Island.
I don't even know all the places yet. I mean, I'm so new here, but I do know that it's like my fiance told me everywhere up here is haunted.
Yeah,
she's like, it's all haunted. She's like, so it's like there's been times I drive by people's houses and like I want to stop and just be like, hi, you don't know me, but can I just walk in your house and like look around, because it just looks like it's totally like, ghosty, I guess they would call it.
It's part of the history is a turn on with the paranormal, going to all these locations and they're really old, and it's not just about the spirits and the ghosts, it's just about the history of the place. Well, who's been there? Yeah, how old it is.
In Florida, everything's built out of brick. And the reason everything's built out of brick is because of hurricanes. And everything looks the same. Every house is so, and I didn't realize this till I moved. Every house in Florida is so plain. It's so plain for the most part. Not every house, but you know what I'm saying. Like it's the majority. It's just so plain. And when I came up here to New England and I'm looking, I finally realized it, because every house in New England, and I'm sure it's like this even over in Europe, has its own distinct character and its own life. It's like every house has its own design, and you don't see the same crap over and over and over again. And they're so interesting to look at. They have like these interesting windows and these interesting, like the way they're formed and the way that they have like these like little silo things built onto them and stuff that I'm probably saying that you guys are probably like, so what? But when you come from a place where everything looks like a cracker box, and all of a sudden you come to a place where there's character and there's life and like these like amazing features of every house, it's like you're like, whoa.
Yeah, we have 16th century castles over here.
Yeah, and the buildings themselves, like just walking. Imagine you're just walking to a restaurant that was probably built, or probably in a, to walk down cobblestone streets.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as cobblestone streets in Florida. No. I mean, you go to St. Augustine, which is like the oldest city in the United States. It was established in 15 something, but it was just a little tiny isolated place. It wasn't like, the real history of America starts in like, as far as the English is involved, starts in like the 1690s and stuff in like Virginia. And I think there was two original establishments. One of them was in Virginia. I forget what they call it. What was it?
Was it Jamestown?
Jamestown.
Yeah, Pocahontas and all that. Yep. Yeah.
And then the other spot was up here, if I'm not mistaken, and actually, what they call not Portland. There was another place that was built just afterwards.
Newport?
No, not Newport. If you said it, I would know what it is.
Portsmouth.
But Portsmouth.
Yeah, you have got Portsmouth over there.
And I believe that was the second city. So you had basically two main cities in the beginning. The one in Virginia and the one in New Hampshire area in there, which wasn't New Hampshire at the time. It was just New England. But
when they
lived.
They were colonizing Virginia for the tobacco, and they had all the Pagwami American Indians over there. That's where Pocahontas got. Apparently, Pocahontas was taken against her will she did not want to come to England and be westernized. And she was so beautiful. She was only 15 and she got made to marry that James, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah, she wasn't very happy about it. But they sailed from Southampton, where I am. Also, the Titanic sailed from here, might I add, over to Virginia. They took a load of women to be wives. Some of them were a bit ruined. Some of them were all right. And they went over there. The men hadn't seen a woman in 15 years. So you can imagine what happened to these so-called wives, can't you?
Oh my gosh.
Now, most of them died of dysentery because there was no good for cropping and that over there. So
but yeah, so you walk around, like, definitely, like, it's amazing to walk around. Like, one of these days I'm going to make my way over that way on the other side of the pond. That's always been like a dream of mine, is getting over there. And I have so much witchcraft family over there as well. It's that I would love to visit and everything, and I always wanted to visit all the things like Stonehenge and stuff. And I only wish Stonehenge was, I understand they had to change it, but like, I guess that some time ago they made it where you can't really go up to it anymore, where it's kind of like you got to witness it from a distance now because people were doing stupid things. But it would just be amazing to get over there.
Yeah, you should come. You'd love it. It's not just, don't just land in London and think that's the be end and end all. There's so much, especially up north in Cornwall and Boscastle. If you're into your witches, that's fantastic. They got the wand of Aleister Crowley that was given to Gerard Gardner.
Oh wow!
In the museum there.
Yeah,
and you can see the Dunkin stick and everything.
Yep.
Yeah, and then up north, there's some fabulous places in Yorkshire and even Hampshire, where I am.
Yeah, yeah. I think what I want to do one day is, there's apparently a cruise there. It's a river cruise, and it starts somewhere up north in Europe, and it winds down with a big river boat, and it's like a yacht, like a cruise boat basically, but it stays on the river. I forget which river it is, but it basically takes you through all these different countries, from like Switzerland to Germany to whatever this river goes through, and it stops at each one. I think it's a 7-day cruise, and England's one of them, and it stops. Yeah, it stops at them, in Ireland, Scotland, and it makes it where you can go in and visit each place over these 7 days. I forget what it's called. I think it's a Viking river cruises or something like that. Something to do with Viking.
That'd be awesome.
But that's like one of my dreams one day. Who knows?
Make sure you have a cooked breakfast.
Oh, yeah?
It's a scone.
Oh, man.
It's not.
Oh, no.
It's not a biscuit. It's a scone.
Yeah, a scone. No, I've heard. So there's an Irish place back in Florida that's traditional Irish. It's a restaurant called The Fields, and they serve all traditional Irish foods. And I remember my ex-wife and I would go there, and she would always get like the blood sausage and stuff like that.
Black pudding.
And yeah, blood pudding and stuff like that. And she'd always be like, try it, and I'd be like, I don't know. I think I tried it once, but it was very livery to me, so I didn't like it very much.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Thank you so much, Mannun. You've been amazing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Few questions. There wasn't really many questions on the live. I put a few up, but if you get a chance to go through them and maybe you answer them, I'll go through them later as well. But I just got so engrossed in what you were talking to me about. I was just like, oh yeah. I blanked all the people that were making comments. I didn't mean to, guys. I'm sorry. I will go back and answer some of them. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Ciao for now. Bye.